In case you don't know, North Korea's official name is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, a name that sounds very reassuring, with democratic and people's right there on your face. Yet, by any conventional measure, this democratic republic is neither democratic nor a true republic. This is a country ruled by one family for 3 generations, under a single party's tight grip, with more than 20 million powerless subjects. To be fair, the North Korean state vehemently insists it is a democracy, just in its own way. And the regime's apologists claim that citizens enjoy a level of democracy unseen in Western countries. The North Korean constitution is packed with lofty promises. It says sovereignty resides in the working people, exercised through their elected assemblies. It guarantees universal suffrage by secret ballot for all citizens over 17. It even enumerates freedoms of speech, press, assembly and association, and the right to recall elected deputies who betray the public's trust. On paper, it paints North Korea as a pluralistic paradise where the government obeys the people and not the other way around. However, these grand principles live only on paper. It's clickbait, like you click a video titled, "Welcome to the Socialist Paradise," but it turned out to be Rick Astley's music video. In practice, North Korea's democracy is a meticulously stage-managed affair, tightly controlled by the ruling Kim. The election day in North Korea functions less as a people's choice and more as a head count, a way for the state to check who's obediently present and who might have fled. In this episode, we will dissect North Korea's political system. We'll see how elections work when there's nothing to choose, how a parliament operates when it mainly applauds, how multiple parties exist without disagreement, and how the people's participation is largely reduced to standing by or standing still as decisions are made for them. Feel interested? But before the show, again, let's pay tribute to our loyal members who financed our production. Thank you, comrades. Now, buckle up, let's dig in.
Over now to the elections in North Korea. The communist state held its first parliamentary elections under the current leader, Kim Jong-un, which pundits say stand to further consolidate his base. The result? Well, you probably won't be that surprised to hear that 100% of the vote went to Kim.
Elections in North Korea are a national ritual that arrives every few years right on schedule, like another carefully choreographed parade. Technically, citizens go to the stations to elect representatives to the Supreme People's Assembly every 5 years, and to provincial, city, and county people's assemblies every 4 years. But in practice, these elections offer the same amount of surprise as tomorrow's sunrise. Each voter is handed a ballot with exactly one state-approved candidate printed on it. The Democratic Front for the Reunification of the Fatherland, the umbrella organization dominated by the ruling party, pre-selects every candidate long before any vote. Crucially, no independent candidates can run for the office. The system's legal framework technically allows any citizen to be nominated, but in practice, only those vetted and approved by the ruling party apparatus ever appear on the ballot. The 2023 reform did introduce an ostensibly new twist by having preliminary nomination meetings where more than one name might be discussed per seat. This gave the immense impression of multiple candidates being considered. Yet, It was still a one-candidate show on election day. Even the new law mandating public disclosure of candidate information ahead of elections, knowing the resume of that single candidate doesn't change the lack of alternatives. The outcome remained as predictable as ever. So, that single name is the entire choice you have. There is no race, no rivals, and no such thing as campaigning, because there is no one to campaign against. The only decision for a North Korean voter is whether to approve the lone candidate or, in theory, reject them. It's democracy reduced to a yes or no question. Of course, the state expects you to say yes every time. To cast a no vote, you, the brave soul, would have to do something conspicuous. In older practice, one must cross out the candidate's name on the ballot, an action hard to hide under the watchful eyes of election officials, but still possible. After the recent local election reform, authorities introduced a two-colour ballot box system, one green box for yes votes and a red box for no votes. On November 26, 2023, state media showed Kim Jong-un casting his ballot in the green box, a very public endorsement of the chosen candidates. The notorious red box, a place to cast a democratic no vote, is said to only exist for the sake of formality. Approaching it is about as advisable as swimming across the Arctic. Voters know that dropping a ballot there would draw immediate attention. Understandably, almost no one does it. In the 2023 local elections, right after the new law, 99.91% of provincial assembly votes were yes, with a rebellious 0.09% who said no. At the city and county levels, the pattern repeated itself. Over 99.8% yes votes and a microscopic 0.1% or so against. But here's the twist. The regime proudly published these tiny against vote percentages, since they were likely choreographed by the regime as evidence of democracy. In the kingdom, a handful of no votes are treated like a major democratic breakthrough, and only underscore how extraordinary it is for anyone to dare not toe the line. For the Supreme People's Assembly elections, the numbers are even more extreme. The last election was held on March 10, 2019. The official results? Turnout was announced at 99.99%, and 100% of the ballots cast were in favour of the prescribed candidates. That's right, comrade. According to state media, not a single person voted no to any of the 687 candidates nationwide. The only reason turnout wasn't a perfect 100% was, as KCNA dutifully explained, that a few voters were abroad or at sea on voting day. It means that even illness or infirmity cannot stop the vote. Authorities arrange mobile ballot boxes to ensure that even the bedridden can freely cast their yes vote. North Korea has perfected the art of unanimous elections. In fact, after some early quasi-experiments decades ago, the regime became accustomed to boasting 100% approval rates. Historically, after the first couple of elections in the 40s showed a handful of dissenters, the government quickly decided to report 100% unanimity in later elections. Only very recently have they allowed the token sliver of no votes again, perhaps to create a veneer of modernity and humans' free will. But even then, the system assures you that flirting with that red box was not a good choice. Voting in North Korea is compulsory, and it's taken so seriously that it doubles as a population census. A North Korean defector, Mina, recounted how citizens living illicitly in China would sneak back into North Korea during election season just to avoid the consequences of not showing up. Failing to vote at the polling station isn't interpreted as a casual abstention, but raises immediate suspicion. It might mark you as a defector or a dissident, a potentially treasonous signal to the authorities. Election officials visit homes to check on those who haven't arrived. In essence, voting is not a right, but an ironclad duty. In the kingdom, one must perform this duty under the public eyes, amid music, dancing, and mandatory enthusiasm. It makes perfect sense that Election Day is treated as a festive holiday. Citizens dress in their best attire, gatherings at polling stations resemble community celebrations, and bands play patriotic tunes as voters line up to cast their preordained ballots. The cheery atmosphere is there to reinforce the idea that this is the people's joyous affirmation of their leaders. Everyone knows, of course, that the outcome had been well decided in advance, but it's dangerous to suggest anything other than genuine delight. So, what if, despite all this pressure, a voter dares to vote no? North Korea has a special way of dealing with these brave hearts. The authorities interpret any rejection of the pre-selected candidate as an act of treason. In a society where neighbors, colleagues, and even family are compelled to inform on signs of disloyalty, casting a no vote is tantamount to painting a target on your back. The penalty for such political defiance can be extremely severe. Your family might disown you, any future promotion becomes delusional, and in the worst cases, you get a one-way ticket to a prison camp for free. In North Korea's worldview, voting no isn't exercising a civic right, but betraying the nation. Therefore, North Korean elections are less about choosing leaders and more about demonstrating fealty. The public has the right to vote, but they cannot choose who gets to be a candidate, nor can they hope to change the government's direction through these votes. The real function of elections is a periodical state ritual that mobilizes the population in a show of unanimous support. It's a nationwide loyalty check-in. Choice is an illusion. Participation is compulsory. North Korea has achieved an election system with zero spoiled ballots, zero voting machine scandals, zero negative campaigning, and virtually 100% turnout. Bravo! What else can I say?
This election is the pinnacle of democracy. Well, that's what the authorities in North Korea say. They say it's why the country's official name is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Voters are choosing about 700 members of the national legislature, the Supreme People's Assembly.
Every 5 years, after the orchestrated ballots are cast and counted, the new slate of Supreme People's Assembly deputies is convened in Pyongyang. The SPA is North Korea's legislature, touted as the highest organ of state power by the Constitution. In theory, this parliament holds the authority to make laws, approve budgets, and debate national issues just as any legislature elsewhere would. But in practice, the Supreme People's Assembly is as rubber stamp as they come. It's a parliament that dutifully assembles only to unanimously endorse the decisions made by the leadership. One might say the SPA doesn't legislate, it legitimizes. It is an applause chamber dressed up as a governing body. Consider how the SPA operates. The Assembly typically meets in full session once or twice a year, usually just a few days each time. These sessions are carefully choreographed events. The deputies, 687 of them in the last term, gather in Pyongyang's Mansudae Assembly Hall, wearing Kim Il-sung lapel pins and seated in rows according to their ranks and protocol. An agenda has been set by the Presidium. Speeches are made, all of them in staunch support of the government's line. Resolutions and laws are introduced, always by top officials or as proposals from the cabinet or the Workers' Party, and then promptly voted on. The voting is a mere formality. Hands shoot up in unison, or electronic voting boards light up uniformly green. Dissenting votes are as unheard of as summer snow. You know, the SPA is accredited as the rubber stamp parliament with good reasons. Its only role is to approve decisions, not make them. According to North Korea's constitution, The SPA wields greater powers on paper. It is empowered to elect the country's top executive officials, including the President of the State Affairs Commission, a position held by none other than the Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. It can amend the constitution, pass laws, ratify treaties, all the hallmarks of a sovereign legislature. However, the SPA does none of that by itself. The executive branch of the kingdom exists under the principle of unified power, meaning that even the Supreme People's Assembly is subordinate to one guiding authority, which, undoubtedly, is the ruling Workers' Party and the Supreme Leader himself. The SPA's responsibility is legislating and institutionalizing decisions made by the Workers' Party of Korea. If you are confused, just think about the SPA as the United Kingdom's House of Commons, except with only one political party and no actual debate.
Order! 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 Order!
It technically elects the cabinet, and the government is formally accountable to it. In fact, the real decision-making happens within the party hierarchy, such as the Politburo, Central Committee, and Kim Jong-un himself. Once the course is decided there, the SPA is convened to give those decisions a legal stamp and an aura of popular approval. To put it another way, imagine if the UK only had the Labour Party. Every major decision would be hashed out behind closed doors by Keir Starmer's inner circle, and only then would the matter be presented to Parliament for unanimous approval. That's how North Korean lawmaking works, except with fewer portraits of King Charles and more of the great leader. It's like in a court, the party serves the prosecutor and the judge at the same time. Your Honour can do whatever he wants. The system makes SPA a swift and effective machine. For example, when Kim Jong-un wanted to update the state's nuclear policy and even adjust the constitution, the SPA was called into session to endorse the changes without a peep of objection. In one October 2024 session, the Assembly dutifully amended the constitution as directed. They changed provisions like the working and voting ages, made some new national policies towards South Korea, and passed new laws on economic reforms, all in line with Kim's earlier speeches. Tellingly, Kim Jong-un did not even attend that session because he didn't need to. The deputies unanimously carried out votes to implement his ingenious ideas. This is very typical. The debates in the SPA, if it can be called that, are entirely one-sided. Sessions often feature reports from officials. For instance, a finance minister's budget report or a premier's speech on the economic plan, which are followed by perfunctory comments praising the leadership's wisdom. There is no question time from any opposition, since there is no opposition. No awkward amendments, no filibusters, no spontaneous resolutions from the floor. Time is ample for celebrating the unmatched brilliance of the Supreme Leader. When the presiding officer calls for a vote, the outcome is known in advance. The deputies rise to their feet to applaud or raise their hands in perfect agreement. The Assembly Hall has echoed with clapping far more than with any real deliberation. You may say that the SPA has perfected unanimity as a real type of performance art. The lack of genuine power in the SPA is further evident in how rarely it meets. Most parliaments around the world meet regularly to handle the continuous business of governance. The SPA, convening only a couple of days a year, clearly is not managing detailed legislative work. Instead, a much smaller body, the Standing Committee, aka the Presidium of the SPA, operates year-round. This elite group consists of only a few dozen senior deputies. They issue decrees and decisions in the SPA's name when the full assembly is not in session. On paper, The Presidium handles only routine matters or emergencies, deferring big issues to the full assembly. But needless to say, the top leadership prefers to use the Presidium as a more convenient tool. It's another layer that ensures the Workers' Party's directives are translated into state acts without divergence. And remember, even the Presidium doesn't truly initiate policy. It must follow orders. The real discussions happen only within the party, not in these representative bodies. It's instructive to note how obedient the Assembly is expected to be. When new deputies are elected to a 5-year term, they are not there to bring new ideas from their constituencies. They are there to represent the party to the people, not the people to the party. The notion of being accountable to the voters exists only in North Korean textbooks. In principle, voters can recall their deputies if they're dissatisfied, but no one in living memory has witnessed such a recall. Instead, deputies might be removed in mid-term only if they fall out of favour with the Kim. And that happens not via any grassroots petition, but via the quiet party's political purges. So, even members of the Assembly are not immune to the pervasive climate of fear. They know better than anyone that any hint of an independent mind could lead to dire consequences. The Assembly's unanimous votes are as much about self-preservation as they are about loyalty. An example of the Assembly's passivity is how it handled the leadership of Kim Jong-un himself. Kim, unlike his father and grandfather, chose not to be listed as an SPA deputy in the 2019 election. It was the first time the top leader didn't occupy a parliamentary seat. That was a calculated move to elevate himself above the legislative body. Nonetheless, at the first session of the new SPA, the deputies promptly elected Kim Jong-un as chairman of the State Affairs Commission and heaped upon him titles like Supreme Representative of all the Korean people. All 687 pairs of hands in the room went up to formalize Kim's leadership role, much as expected. The SPA thereby reaffirmed that it may be the highest organ in name, but Kim Jong-un is the supreme leader in every meaningful sense. Besides, the deputies know there are no freely elected officials in North Korea. Power resides with Kim and his inner circle, and whatever authority others possess is merely an extension of his. They sit in their seats not by popular mandate, but by the leader's grace. And so, to secure their positions and signal loyalty, they do what the system requires. They praise Kim, publicly and enthusiastically, as the source of all wisdom and power. In sum, to call the SPA a mere rubber stamp might even understate how automatic its compliance is. Rubber stamps at least have to be pressed. The SPA stamps itself, eagerly. When state media reports on SPA meetings, they often highlight the atmosphere of unanimity and patriotic zeal. It's said that when a key resolution is passed, say, an increase in military spending or a constitutional amendment enshrining North Korea's nuclear status, the hall erupts in prolonged applause and shouts of approval. One imagines that if an observer from a real democracy were present, they'd be stunned by the lack of any nay voices. But for North Koreans, this display has a purpose. It reinforces the narrative that the entire country speaks with one voice. Wow! The DPRK is so democratic that there are no disagreements at all.
It's a big event in North Korea. Women dress in long gowns, men in suits. It's voting day, where people cast their ballots for provincial, city, and county people's assemblies. But here, voters are simply handed ballots to place in a box. The candidates, the winners, pre-decided by Kim Jong-un's government. For each election, there's just one candidate on the ballot. A vote against the selected candidate goes into a separate box. But a no vote is considered an act of treason, as is the failure to show up to vote.
Take a look at North Korea's political structure, and you might be surprised to find that it appears to have multiple political parties. Apart from the ruling Workers' Party of Korea, there are two other parties: the Korean Social Democratic Party and the Chondoist Chongu Party, plus a few token independents and social organizations that altogether form the Democratic Front for the Reunification of the Fatherland. This looks like a wonderful coalition government, perhaps very similar to the popular fronts seen in countries like France and Germany. The reality, however, is that all these parties march in lockstep. They are often jokingly called figurehead parties or satellite parties, existing not to offer alternative policies, but to give a facade of liberty and pluralism. North Korea is effectively a one-party state in practice, as every one of those minor groups is completely subservient to the Workers' Party's leadership. You know, many parties, one direction. The Workers' Party of Korea has, since the country's founding, been the nucleus of all political life, blurring the lines between them and the state. Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un have ruled not just as national leaders, but as heads of the Workers' Party. The other two puppet parties, the Social Democrat and the Chondoist, were organizations from the pre-independent era that the regime allowed to operate under strict control. For decades, they have been completely integrated into the ruling front. They never run against the workers, they run with them. In elections, regardless of their affiliations, all candidates are pre-approved by the Democratic Front and appear on the single slate presented to voters. The leaders of these minor parties unfailingly praise the ruling Kim and endorse all major government positions. Their role is create an atmosphere of democracy, not to question the leadership. The numerical balance of the SPA illustrates how these parties function. Of the 687 seats in the Supreme People's Assembly, the vast majority belong to workers. Historically, the WPK usually occupies roughly 90% of the seats, leaving a small allocation to the other parties and non-party independents. For instance, back in 1990, the Assembly's composition was officially reported as 601 seats for the Workers' Party, 51 for the Korean Social Democratic Party, 22 for the Chondoist Chongu Party, and 13 for independents. This gave the appearance of a multi-party legislature, but those independents and minor party deputies were carefully chosen loyalists who provided no opposition. And crucially, all those elected, regardless of affiliation, are part of the Democratic Front, which has a common platform dictated by the workers.
Choi suffered a complicated family history amid the division of the two Koreas and the political whirlwind of modern Korean history. He's a 73-year-old South Korean citizen. Choi's father served as a deputy head of an agency in charge of inter-Korean affairs and the chief of the Chondoist Chong Party, a political party originating from the Korean traditional religion Chondogyo. After his death in 1989, his wife Liu led the minor party and became a member of the Presidium of the Supreme People's Assembly.
One must wonder, do these minor parties do anything at all? Yes and no. They do hold the occasional party congress or central committee meeting, though under governmental supervision. They publish bland statements and sometimes appear in state media to applaud national policies. The Chondoist Chongu Party, for example, represents followers of Chondoism, a native Korean religious movement, and it was once chaired by our old pal Tredokshin. In practice, its role has been to rally any possible Chondogyo believers behind the regime, not that there's any visible independent religious activity allowed. The Social Democratic Party used to include some business people and Christians in the early years. Today, it largely serves as a home for a few powerful individuals who are out of the system, but are nonetheless regime loyalists. The heads of these parties often sit on the SPA Presidium or hold vice-chair positions in parliamentary committees, becoming the symbols of DPRK democracy. This multiple parties with no divergence arrangement is deliberate. It has historical roots in the Communist United Front strategy. In the aftermath of World War II, as North Korea's socialist system was set up, Kim Il-sung's party tolerated a couple of smaller parties as a way to consolidate control and project unity. And over the years, any potential independent thinkers within them were purged or co-opted. It makes the Democratic Front now essentially the Workers' Party, wearing a few different hats. In effect, the minor parties function more like affiliated organizations. They lend their names to the idea that North Korea has a broad political consensus encompassing different segments of society: workers, peasants, religious believers, youth, overseas Koreans, etc., all unified in the front. The outside world might scoff, but internally, the regime uses this to claim a 100% mandate. See, all other parties and independents agree with us workers completely. Even North Koreans themselves don't often talk about these minor parties, since they matter so little in daily governance. Ask a person on the street in Pyongyang about Chondoism, and you'd likely get a puzzled look. The concept of a loyal opposition or alternative policy platform is absent. The minor party's existence is occasionally taught in civics classes as proof of North Korea's pluralistic democracy, but everyone understands that the Workers' Party leads and the rest follow. The state media routinely refers to North Korea's leadership as the party and people as one unit, and the constitution explicitly designates the Workers' Party as the leading force of society and the state. That constitutional article, which was recently updated to enshrine Kim Il-sungism, Kim Jong-ilism, as the guiding ideology, leaves no doubt that other political actors have no independent standing. From time to time, the regime will showcase the minor parties for international visitors or in propaganda to say, "Look, we have other parties too." A visiting foreign delegation might meet a representative of the Social Democratic Party who parrots the same lines about national unity and support for Kim Jong-un. In summary, what can North Koreans elect in terms of parties? They can choose among candidates who might wear different party labels. But since all those candidates are on the same team, it's like choosing between identical twins wearing different colored shirts. The public cannot form new parties, cannot organize any opposition group, and cannot advocate for alternative policies through any political grouping. Doing so is utterly forbidden and would bring you a free ticket to re-education camps. The entire political spectrum in North Korea ranges from far left to slightly less far left. Or you may say, there are indeed multiple parties in the kingdom: the party, the party's party, and the party's other party.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un won re-election from the country's rubber stamp parliament on Wednesday, the first day of the Supreme People's Assembly's first session under Kim's leadership.
Despite earlier speculations of a major reshuffle, there were no significant changes to key posts. Our Hwang Sang-hee starts us off.
In a true democracy, citizen participation means active engagement, voting, monitoring elections, joining civil society groups, petitioning leaders, debating policies, even protesting in the streets when they feel necessary. In the kingdom, citizen participation is of a very different character. Here, participation largely means following orders, showing up where you're told to show up, and providing enthusiastic consent on cue. One might call it participation by standing still. The populace is mobilized to be present and be obedient, but not to independently influence policy. From a young age, North Koreans learn that the spectrum of acceptable political activity ranges from adoring the leader to praising the leader's decisions. Anything outside that spectrum is effectively illegal. Freedom of speech, assembly, and association are all nominally guaranteed by the Constitution, but there is zero tolerance for the actual exercise of those rights. Forming an independent political organization or a protest movement is unthinkable, as the regime brands any such attempt as sedition or counter-revolution. The result is that the only associations people can join are state-created mass organizations: the Young Pioneers, the Youth League, the General Federation of Trade Unions, the Women's Union, neighborhood watch units, etc. These groups are not venues for voicing grievances. They're transmission belts for the party's ideology. Membership is often compulsory or near universal in one form or another, and its activities involve studying propaganda, attending rallies, and reinforcing loyalty to each other. A North Korean citizen's political life is thus a carefully scripted affair. Mandatory meetings are a staple. You will attend weekly self-criticism sessions at workplaces or local party cells, where individuals participate by confessing minor failings and reaffirming their devotion to the leadership. Community gatherings are convened to hear important announcements or watch televised speeches by Kim Jong-un. Attendance is obligatory, silence and applause at the right moments equally so. When the state organizes a mass rally, say, to celebrate a missile test or denounce imperialism, tens of thousands will be marshaled in a public square, each person holding a placard or shouting a slogan in unison. From afar, it looks like passionate civic engagement. Up close, it's clear everyone is doing exactly what they must. Participants often have literally been bussed in from their offices or homes, handed the signs, and told what chants to yell. Plus, there are security personnel standing by to ensure nobody deviates from the program. A famous example of choreographed participation is the mass games, those grand stadium performances where 100,000 people flip colored cards and perform gymnastics in perfect synchronization to form giant mosaics of the Kim leaders and ideological slogans. It's a breathtaking display of unity and discipline. It's also a potent metaphor for political life. Individuals subsumed into a collective image, and every movement is dictated from above. Participation here means being a pixel in the portrait the regime wants to paint. If you stand out, you spoil the picture, and that is unacceptable. Even standing still can be a form of mandated participation. When Kim Jong-un or another top official enters a room, North Koreans are expected to immediately stand up, burst into applause, and often remain standing as a sign of respect until told to sit. If a policy is announced that requires public support, workplaces might organize everyone to stand in front of a camera crew and cheer, or to write letters of loyalty. Just imagine a whole country where political involvement largely means standing, clapping, and cheering on demand. What happens if someone refuses to play their part? Again, the Big Brother has eyes everywhere to detect any deviates. Ordinary citizens are under pervasive surveillance by the secret police, by neighborhood informants, even by their peers. If you gripe about food shortages and somehow imply the government is at fault, a neighbor could report you for disloyal speech. If you skip an official event or don't hang the mandated flag on a holiday, local authorities will take note. Surveillance is so ingrained that most people censor themselves long before they would ever openly challenge anything. As a result, the safest form of participation is simply to keep your head down and go along. Don't draw attention, echo the slogans, perform the required motions, stand still when told, march when ordered. Even members of the ruling party elite, who might privately hold differing opinions on policy, operate under the constant threat of extreme penalties for any perceived dissent. High-ranking officials have been purged or even executed for falling out of favour or showing insufficient zeal. If that's the fate of an elite cadre, one can imagine the peril for an average citizen who dares contradict the official narrative. The 10 principles for the establishment of the one ideology system demand absolute ideological unity and obedience to the leader. Violating those principles can destroy not only the individual, but also their family's standing. Thus, citizens learn that silence and compliance are the only safe political stances. There is an old saying in authoritarian states: the tallest nail gets hammered down. In North Korea, no nails stick up. But of course, beneath that surface, people have opinions, grumbles, even private jokes about the system. But expressing them publicly is off limits. One of the only permitted ways to voice yourself is ironically the requirement to criticize oneself and one's peers in those party meetings. But even those sessions are tightly scripted. You are supposed to confess petty faults, like being late to work or not studying the Kim speeches hard enough, and not to criticize the system or leaders. Indeed, if something goes wrong, the narrative is that local cadres were at fault or external enemies caused trouble, never that the central policy was flawed. People may gripe about life's hardships in private whispers, but they also quickly add a formula like, if only we worked harder for the leader, things would improve, lest anyone suspect disloyalty. Beyond the scripted elections, North Koreans cannot lobby for policy shifts because there are no independent media or NGOs to champion public concerns. There are no televised town hall debates and no strikes. It is telling that when famine struck in the 1990s, people's response was not to protest or riot. It was to silently scatter in search of food, or in extreme cases, escape the country. The social contract offered by Pyongyang is simple. We, the regime, will think and decide. You, the people, will show support and compliance. If there's hardship, tighten your belt and blame the foreign imperialists or local traitors, but never us. So, political participation in North Korea often means standing still, literally and figuratively. Literally, as in standing at attention during endless ceremonies, standing in lines to vote without a choice, and standing in mass rallies holding a flag. When mobilized to contribute extra labor for a national project, they do so. When ordered to attend ideological training, they sit and listen. When told to cheer, they cheer. When told to stand down, they fall silent. A dark joke once whispered among North Koreans was, "Of course we have freedom of speech. We also have freedom after speech, just not for long. You can say anything you want, but the dire consequences will catch up, usually very soon." Thus, most people simply don't utilize their rights. We may say, the North Korean political system is a dark inversion of democracy. The consent of the governed is obtained by default, through fear and indoctrination, rather than active choice. North Koreans have a voice in their government only insofar as they are permitted to echo what the government tells them. So, how democratic is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea? By now, you should have your own answer. North Korea has all the trappings of democracy: a parliament, elections, multiple parties, and rights enshrined in a constitution. But these things exist in name only, carefully orchestrated to serve an authoritarian feudal dynasty. It is a case of inverted democracy. The structures are there, but their purpose is flipped. Instead of channeling the people's will upward to shape the state, they channel the leadership's will downward to the people, with a thin veneer of popular consent painted on for show. Elections in the DPRK turned out to be a masterclass in no other choices. The public can elect representatives, but only from a predetermined list of one per district. Essentially, a nationwide yes vote to affirm the status quo. The Supreme People's Assembly likewise carries an impressive title, but functions as a rubber stamp. It assembles, it applauds, it approves, and then it adjourns, leaving real power elsewhere. The presence of multiple political parties in North Korea is another grand illusion. The parties in agreement are essentially one party wearing a few costumes. They do not represent divergent interests or philosophies. They represent the same interest, the regime's survival, and the same Juche philosophy. It's a showcase of unity masquerading as pluralism. Finally, the North Korean people's participation in their political system is largely symbolic and coerced. They participate the way spectators do in a tightly controlled show by following the director's cues. Here, the safest way to be part of the political life is not move against the current. Stand in line, stand in unity, stand in silence. North Korea calls itself a democratic people's republic, but perhaps a more honest label would be a dynastic one-party regime with people's decorative participation of Korea. Of course, they would never put that on the door. Instead, they keep the sign that says democratic and People's Republic, perhaps believing or hoping the repetition makes it real. And in reality, North Koreans know that power flows only from the top. They know what is expected of them: loyalty, obedience, and applause. Not questions, not choices. In the DPRK, the people have every right to vote yes, and so they do, unfailingly. The tragedy and irony of North Korea's political system is that it entombs a whole nation's political potential in ritual and fear. Imagine a different path where North Koreans could genuinely voice their needs and shape their government. It is a distant dream under the current dynastic rule. Until something changes, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea will remain a democracy only in its proclamations.